Let's take a look now at what we expect to have in our unit test methods. This will give us a good template on how to code them, which we can use as we're doing our unit testing. If you keep this mental template in your head when you're coding your unit tests, you can't go far wrong in my opinion. It keeps things nice and simple and provides us with a structure we can use consistently across all tests. So, it's generally accepted that there are two main types of logical structure for your unit test methods. I'll just say unit test now for this, but just know I'm referring to the methods which form a single unit test, i.e. test a specific aspect of your system under test, or the production class you're testing, if you prefer to call it that. Both of these approaches are pretty much the same, but just look at testing from a slightly different perspective and are better suited to different audiences. We'll come to this in a second, but the two choices you have for the logical structure of our unit tests are either arrange, act, assert, sometimes referred to as AAA, and given, when, then. Let's think for a second about high-level things we need to have happen when we write a test from a logical viewpoint. The method we're testing needs to be called. This is the thing we're testing, so we definitely need that to happen. Also, the point of calling the method is so we can check what the method did after the fact. So we need to have some code which allows us to observe what happened, so we can evaluate whether the test passed or failed. That only leaves the other aspect, which is to set up the context correctly for the test before we invoke the method. Now, if we rearrange these into their correct order, which is setup, invoke the method, then check the results, we have the AAA formula for arrange, act, assert. In this scheme, we have an arrange phase. This is where we put code which will set up our test. For example, put the system and the test into a particular state prior to invoking the method being tested. This might be setting it up with references to mock collaborators that it will work with during the execution of the method, and similarly setting up any state or behavior we require those mock collaborators to exhibit during the tests. Once we have that setup done, our arrange phase, then we can actually invoke the method we're testing. This is the act phase. We really just want to have a single method being called here. Don't call multiple methods. If you do, you're allowing the implementation detail of the production class being tested to leak into the test case. So the act phase has just one method invocation, the one method that's being tested. Then once we've invoked the method, we can do the checking part and check the results. This is the assert phase. Like its name suggests, in this part, this is where you'd put assertions about the state of the world after the method has been invoked. This can either be asserting something about the return parameter of the method call, if it returns some result, or might be assertions around the state of the objects passed into the method call, or possibly verifying the calls or data, etc., which were passed to the mock collaborators. Now there are two schools of thought on unit testing. State-based verification, you do these with assertions, and behavior verification, you do these with checking the method calls on mocks. We won't get into this now as it's a bit advanced, but however you're checking the results, just understand that you'd put them in the assert phase of the unit test. Now that we know what arrange, act, assert is, what about this given, when, then format? Well, this is a style referred to as behavior-driven testing. In behavioral-driven testing, what you're doing is looking at the system from the behavior you want it to have. Breaking it down, we have the phases as, first off, have a given phase, which sets up the preconditions or the state of the system before we invoke the behavior being tested. Next, have a when phase, which performs the behavior, and finally have a then phase, which asserts a state of the union after the behavior has been done. In other words, looks at the post conditions. This notion of pre and post conditions, by the way, is a good way of looking at things. Preconditions are what you want to be true before the test. Post conditions are what you're looking to be true after the test. You could have, for example, a test scenario like this. Given the user is logged in, when the user logs out, then the user cannot make a purchase. Tests like these, or more specifically, using given, when, then wording, usually lend themselves to being at a higher level of abstraction than a simple unit test. In fact, given unit tests are more low level anyway, focusing on a single class, you tend to encounter arrange, act, assert a lot more. Nevertheless, it's a valid style of writing test cases, so it's worth mentioning. Typically you'd find these more in tests which are for business consumption by business analysts, testers and product owners. In other words, you find them more in integration and acceptance tests, so it's less common in unit tests. So, which one should you use? Well, it's up to you really. Arrange, act, assert is popular with developers. It's a bit more technical oriented in its choice of wording. The focus is on what the unit test does, i.e. its implementation. Given, when, then, however, is popular with business analysts and testers because it focuses more at looking at the behavioural aspects and it reads easier for those less technical audiences. Whichever one you use though, the structure is the same. Just make sure you're consistent in using them. In other words, pick one style and stick to it. I usually do arrange, act, assert and have comments in the test code with those words so it's very clear which bit of code is doing which phase. It's a good practice to get into, and you can even set up a template in your IDE to generate this automatically for you. So, Now we know how to structure our test methods with either arrange, act, assert, or given, when, then. This should put you in a good place to write your tests from here. Just remember the different phases, stick to them, and you'll be writing very clean, very focused, and easy to understand test code.